hey, this is not Omar's voice. This is Eric starting off, which is not the way we normally do it. And we're switching it up because we are privileged to have the first unifying World Natural Bodybuilding Federation champion, along with the IFPA Yorton Cup champion, Brian Whitacre, on. Honestly, Brian Whitacre has been a huge inspiration to me for a long time. He only started competing in bodybuilding a few years prior to me, but he was someone I saw as kind of like the people's champ. And he went round for round with Jim Cordova back in the day in the mid-2000s, winning the lightweight world title at WNBF Worlds and multiple times not quite clinching the win at the WNBF Worlds, and then eventually did after pure hard work, and then went over and won the IFPA Yorton Cup title, beating world champions to do so in both cases and bringing a level of conditioning that I would say is yet unseen and truly setting a new standard. But the coolest thing about him, as 3D Muscle Journey representative here today, is that he is a father first, an economics professor second,
right,
and then a bodybuilder third. And he really breaks the mold of the idea that you need to be obsessive and solely focused on bodybuilding to be successful, because he has achieved no higher level of success. And I would say he displays good, obviously, he's a gifted bodybuilder. You can't get to his level without being it. But he is by no means, say, your Doug Miller or your Martin Daniels or your Flex Wheeler genetics, if we want to go on the other side of the fence, or someone who you look at him and just go, wow, you were born Mr. Olympia.
Yep.
He's got a propensity to build muscle, and he's certainly got the mental attributes, but he is someone who maximizes everything and never lets his ego get in the way.
Yeah, and that's something that I found very interesting about this episode, and that is when he was to try and form what his identity is, bodybuilding was third in the importance for him, where his family's first, his degree and his job being an economics professor and the research that he does is second, and then a bodybuilder third. So you think to yourself, wow, this is one of the most accomplished natural bodybuilders, and he places that third. But then also, I think he may have used that phrase where he said maximizer or optimizer. I forget which one he personally used. Optimize.
Within the constraints.
Within the constraint, which is just such a, that has the real utility for a lifted approach with that aspect, where sometimes maybe there might be that paradigm of thinking where it's all or nothing.
Yeah.
Rather I went 5 grams over. It's done, like whatever my day of eating or my training, I wasn't able to get the training effect, or I missed a rep or this or that. He's an optimizer of all given variables. How can he optimize that situation? And to give a shitty example in video games is, I call it min-maxing. Given in RPGs, you try and get the best weapon set, armor set.
I'm a fighter, so I'm going to keep my charisma, wisdom, and intelligence low.
Yeah.
But I'm going to bump up that constitution, dex, and strength.
Yeah.
And I'm going to drop my scribe skill, because I'm not going to be reading stuff. That's the wizard in my party. Yeah. And I'm going to get that dual wield specialty, so I can really go ham. And once I get the double attacks at level 3, ooh, it doesn't matter what your AC is, my hit dice are going to be smashing on yours.
Let's be honest, if you were to come up with your 3, like your identity, there'd be so many. Like wife, family, of course, really high up there. Your contributions to science, really up there. Probably LARPing would be third, then bodybuilding. Is that a fair assessment?
I'm only going to tell you this once. I'm a tabletop role-playing game player. LARPers, we live in a caste system in the role-playing world. And LARPers,
they're the untouchables.
LARPers are the untouchables. Tabletop role-playing game, essentially, the only person we can touch is LARPers, and that's just to beat them.
Right.
But we're definitely better. And then after that, you get people who play it, with their friends occasionally, and they don't even actually roll dice. They use the app on their phone. They're a little more normal. And then you get people who only play RPG video games.
Right.
But LARPers, no, scum of the earth.
Yeah, please don't associate.
Scum of the earth.
I apologize, and I apologize to any LARPers listening that are offended by Eric's word. We try here to be all-inclusive, but apparently not with LARPers.
There's limits to everything. There's limits to everything.
Has science gone too far? Question mark.
Yeah. You know what's going to happen? I'm going to be walking in the park normally, and I'm going to hear the word fireball, and then a tennis ball's going to hit me in the head, and I'm going to regret this what I've said.
It'll be maybe a career-ending injury for bodybuilding.
Yep, because that's how fragile I am. If you've seen that recent video of me getting wrestled by Chip Conrad in Mass, you see I just get tossed around like a little girl.
Well, the funniest thing that you said to me is just with your neck. I just joked with you when you were in Toronto last time. I said, Eric, it might go down here. We might have to beat someone up. You're like, Omar, I will step in for you, but just know one punch and I'll probably be hospitalized.
Yeah. Yeah. I just got diagnosed with 2 herniated discs in my neck, so I'll throw a punch. And the fight will end quick because I will be on the ground peeing on myself, and everyone will be like, "Oh my God, this got really serious!" Like, call the police, and I'll be lying on the ground, supposed to talk because of the neck down. Like, "You're welcome, Omar." I ended that fight quick. Now, please, let's find a way to compete in like cheek hypertrophy because that's all I'm going to have left.
Oh man! With that being said, you're in for a treat. Honestly, I came in not knowing much, being perfectly transparent about Brian Whitacre, but the lessons that he gave, I think, apply to everyone out there.
Oh, yeah.
So I hope everyone enjoys this episode. Wow. This is the new revolution. This is the technology that we were promised in 1904, I believe, when they said we will be speaking to people through thousands of miles and be able to hear their every word. I am joined today by a bodybuilder, Brian, and then also Eric. Eric, you do a little lifting?
I think relative to the field we're with, maybe.
No. Maybe. It's questionable.
Yeah, it's
questionable.
very questionable.
We're excited at Iron Culture. Once again, there's a key reason why we have both iron, as James Fitzgerald said. Keep the iron. You got to have the iron. When there's nothing else in your life, iron will be there. But culture as well. Taking a historical, cultural look at lifting, and in particular, I know for Eric, bodybuilding is very near and dear to him. I've grown to appreciate bodybuilding, and while we were here in Sacramento, Eric said, "You know what? Let's get like the natty bodybuilder with an A at the end on that would be able to talk about modern day natural bodybuilding, balancing that with his life, so incorporating it in a way that is more holistic. We use that word often, just in a way where, contrary to maybe the popular perception of bodybuilding, where I think the word obsessive would be thrown around, with a negative connotation, where, you were just recently, Brian, published, as we heard, in an economics journal, which there was a little bit of academic envy, I would say.
I don't even know if it would be envy. It's more like this
hatred,
this crushing knowledge that I'm inadequate compared to, once again, to the dual champion Brian Whitacre. So first, we're going to try to make Brian as uncomfortable as possible because he is a humble man.
We could do this,
and we're going to extol. He's not going to get a chance to talk for a while. We're going to extol his virtues for so long.
For him, we're speaking for you, buddy.
He'll have way too long to unravel it all to even to like humble himself. So that's the goal.
Yep.
So first, Brian Whitacre. I just want to say it's a huge honor to have you on, all jokes aside. You've been someone I've looked up to since I picked up Natural Bodybuilding Fitness magazine and looked at your pictures and read your articles on your website. And I found myself equally impressed with your physique, your conditioning, your competitive record as I did with your perspective as a bodybuilder. As someone who always discussed being an ambassador for the sport, representing yourself in a professional way as a professional natural bodybuilder, competing at the highest level, kicking it back and forth with guys like Jim Cordova in the mid-2000s, all the way to staying present and then unifying the titles of the Yorton Cup and the WNBF Worlds in 2015 with arguably one of the most conditioned physiques anyone saw, and just kind of like, oh, I guess we can get leaner, was kind of the response of the community as a whole. And not only that, but you're a father. You're a professor of economics, is that correct?
It is.
Well, I'm going to let you actually take a second, and if you can introduce us to who is the man, Brian Whitacre, for all the audience who doesn't know who you are.
Well, thanks, Omar and Eric, for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity. I've listened to a couple of your all's podcasts, and you guys are doing a great job in spreading the word about lifting and the natural movement and just everything that goes on behind the scenes of being involved in the physique community. So like you guys said, my name is Brian Whitacre. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a little bit older now. I'm in my 40s now, but I've been competing in natural bodybuilding since the mid-2000s. I got my start. My first show was a tiny little show when I was in graduate school at Virginia Tech. I think there were a total of 5 people, maybe 6 people in the Mr. Virginia Tech show, and that was in 2003. And I kind of caught the bug from there, went on, and in 2005 I did well and won, about 4 different pro cards and natural organizations. We're all very splintered in the natural organizations, And then starting in '06, I really kind of focused on the WNBF organization and on trying to do well in their world championships, which is the big contest they have in November of every year. And so from '06 to really 2000, I guess it was 12, I would, I did pretty well. I think I won like 4 lightweight world titles, but I could never win the overall. And so in 2013 and 2015, I again won the lightweight class, came really, really close in 2013. And then finally, like you said, in 2015, achieved what was really my goal from the beginning, which was to win the WNBF Worlds Overall. And I also managed to capture the Yorton title that year. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm the only one who's done it in both years. That won both those titles in the same year. So that's who I am from a bodybuilding perspective. But I think we'll talk more about this in a second. That's kind of, just a little kind of caveat to who I think I really am. I'm a proud father of 3 and, husband to my wife, Jill. And I'm a professor here at Oklahoma State University. I'm proud of what I've been able to accomplish in academia. Like you guys said, I've worked my way up the academic ranks. And actually, I should caveat, I just passed the 50 mark on how many journal articles I've published. So I've been fairly prolific in terms of publishing journal articles. In fact, I just got a chaired professorship, which means they give you some extra funds to do research. So that's a nice little thing. I can go bring in some new graduate students and do some projects I've been wanting to do. So, you mentioned the whole how you put things in perspective. And for me, the priority was always very clear. It was family number 1, then the job, and then bodybuilding. And that can be challenging because a lot of times I diet for a long time during prep, like a lot of people do. And when you're going through a prep, if you have to travel to a conference, how do you take 4 days worth of food with you? How do you find a good place to train? Are you really going to be, having an optimal training session in a hotel gym? Probably not. So you got to make those trade-offs. I just call it, maximizing, optimizing what you have given your constraints. And so again, for me, if the wife called and said, "Hey, the kids are sick, you've got to come," I'm not going to tell her no. I can't do that because I've got a deadlift today, and that's not going to happen. I've got to prioritize those things first, and then you optimize what you can in terms of bodybuilding.
And that's so well said. And it's a personality, or rather, it's a perspective that I think conflicts with the personality I see a lot in bodybuilding, where it's almost like there is only 2 options. It's either what is optimal, what is going to get me the best results for my sport, or nope, off the table. There is no other option. Actually, that there's 2 doors. I'm only going to walk through one. Really, there's one option.
And you just broke all the doors down.
Yeah, and like a lot of the bodybuilders we work with, and I'm sure that you've consulted with and tried to help over the years, everything is organized around bodybuilding. So I will spend time with my family. I will do my job. I will have other hobbies or endeavors in life, but it in no way in my mind can I see it conflicting with my bodybuilding goals. And many of them will say things about sacrifice, or if you want to get to the highest level, or this stage in my life, yada yada yada, talk a good game, with the assumption, or either implicit or explicit, that they're leaving something on the table externally in terms of their performance. That if they do that, but I'm by no means am I like a coach that's been around since 1975 or anything like that. But having now worked with, I would say, around 300 competitive bodybuilders, it's my experience, Brian, and I don't know if you've seen this just being in and around the sport, those who maintain that attitude don't stay bodybuilders. But the ones who are able to find a way to integrate everything are the ones who are actually in the sport long enough to achieve their peak, like we've seen you arguably do, I would say. Not to say you couldn't get better, because I know it's just kind of our mentality. And I think it's just, you're an undeniable example, in my opinion, of someone who, it's not like when you look at Brian Whitacre, you think he has the perfect genetics for the sport. Obviously, I think you're gifted, and I don't know that it's possible to achieve what you have without being at least above average in terms of one's muscle building potential and symmetry and things like that, and basic structure. But it's very obvious that there is a ton of hard work that's been put into your physique, that everything that you can maximize in terms of your physique, like conditioning, posing, that you have, and you've fought consistently until you actually achieve the highest title while putting bodybuilding third in that list.
So I just want to basically use you as an example, as maybe for everyone out there who's a little skeptical of the whole balanced message, just consider this example.
Here's our offering.
We offer you Brian Whitacre.
Yeah. As tribute.
Well, I appreciate that. Now, I appreciate the comments about the genetics too, because I probably do have above average genetics for bodybuilding. I can get lean. It takes trying, but I get lean. But I've been critiqued throughout my career for, oh, he's too small. He's a small guy. He's only 160 some pounds on stage. That's puny. And ironically, I've trained every way I know how to try to add muscle to my frame. I'm not exceptionally strong, but I've pulled in the sixes. I'm squatting near 5. I've benched reasonable amounts, and I'm not going to get to 170, 180 pounds on stage. It's not going to happen. Early in my career, I thought maybe that was possible, but now it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So, you pointed out that you can maximize other aspects of your physique, and that's essentially what I've tried to do. So obviously we can, I pushed the conditioning as far as I could. But it's little things like posing tweaks, making sure your color's optimal, just even trunk choice, small things that you can take advantage of that other people might not be paying as much attention to. So, I do think I made, significant improvements to my physique over time. But it's probably didn't show up in the stage weight. It's not, I was pretty consistently in the low 160s throughout my career. But if you look at, my 09 picks compared with like my 2013 picks, there were some pretty good gains, even though the stage weight might have been around the same. I'm pretty proud of that, and I think that going back to your initial point that you have to prioritize certain things. I accomplished that, like I said, while I was focusing on a job, a family, and in fact, my wife we had our first child in 2011. And then we had the twins in 2013. And so I actually went through the in 2014, I went through that 2015 prep when I won both titles with 1-year-old twins at home. And so I was, not getting a whole lot of sleep. I was waking up in the middle of the night to feed and all that fun stuff. But I look back on it and I'm like, that was awesome. That's what it took. And again, there were a lot of times when I had to set down bodybuilding and dedicate time to the family. But it can be done. It can be done. That's all I'll say.
Now, can we rewind a little bit, because I want to take Brian as a case study, because prior to Eric, I may have had some preconceived notions of bodybuilding as a whole. I wouldn't say specifically a natural bodybuilding, but through observing Eric with his contest prep and then seeing him compete, it has definitely changed my personal perspective. And it's interesting to hear both of you guys talk, because the path of kind of moderation, and we spoke about this before last year, that moderation doesn't mean mediocrity, right? In terms of what you do. And then I think it was yesterday, which actually would be many months ago or years ago in the podcast world, you were speaking about some particular qualities that you've observed in bodybuilders, but more specifically natural bodybuilders, where you said detail-oriented, just a few different things. Brian, I want to rewind, like I said, however, and go back into your motivations as to why you got or how you got into bodybuilding, or just your, general experiences growing up, or things that motivated you to start bodybuilding, and then what made you continue bodybuilding, or just any pertinent details you feel in your journey towards achieving what you've achieved.
Yeah, great question, and it's good to kind of relive these the steps that I was taking along the way. So I was actually the weakest kid in my high school gym class. I could not bench 100 pounds. They put 25 pounds plates on the bar. I couldn't do it. And so, throughout, I was a soccer player in high school, and a painstakingly mediocre soccer player. But I liked training with weights, and unfortunately, there were girls in the class that were stronger at bench than me. It's just a very difficult time. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the fact that you could push yourself. And so in high school, I started lifting. I got more serious about it in college, but I didn't know anything about competitive bodybuilding or anything like that until I went to graduate school. And so I was pretty serious about the gym during college. I would go to the gym regularly. I had no idea about diet or anything like that. But in graduate school and that was at Virginia Tech, I finally ran into a few guys at the gym that thought I had, saw that I trained pretty hard and thought I might have some potential. And so they pushed me to give that first contest a try. And I did, and that was, like I said, in 2003. And really, after you step on stage that first time, you either know if it's something you enjoy or you don't. And I did. I really enjoyed it. And the thing I love about this sport is that it challenges you both physically and mentally, right? I mean, physically in the gym, the weightlifting is awesome. Everybody loves lifting heavy weights. You just feel great after a good workout. But it's extremely taxing, mentally. And in fact, we'll probably talk about this here later on. But I've had some surgeries over the past couple of years, and in fact, I ended up having both my legs broken. And so I will say right now that it's more challenging mentally to go through a contest prep than it is to recover from something pretty serious like a broken leg. I mean, Eric, you know how hard it is when you're dieting constantly and you have to watch every morsel of food that goes in your mouth. It's very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, to me, I love the fact that it pushes me in that barrier. I really like, I'm a pretty driven person. I like, having an end goal. And so for me, bodybuilding is a great way to pursue that. And so, like I said, I kind of meandered around this, but once I kind of caught the bug and turned pro, my goal was to be the best. I would never have said this publicly back then, but when I turned pro, I said, okay, I'm going to try to win the world's overall title. And it took me, a decade, and during none of that time would I have ever said that, but that was my goal. That was my driving, passion behind during that decade period. I would think about it when I couldn't sleep at night during a low carb day. But I'm pretty big on having those long-term goals, those things that you strive for. And I can tell you, after every loss, I thought about it, and I thought about, hey, I didn't accomplish my goal. What can I change next time to get there? And it was a long period, but eventually I did it, and I'm pretty proud of that.
Yeah, I mean, to say I relate to some of the things you're saying would be an understatement. And in many ways, you're just like the Super Saiyan version of kind of my experience.
You're the Krillin to his Goku, I understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like a lot of the things you've been talking about, like being somebody who I don't have kids, for one. Not only do I not have kids, I didn't have 1-year-old twins during this prep, but I have been traveling, and this is the first prep where I've been basically, a lightweight public figure who has like jobs and things that I have to do, and a business owner, an entrepreneur, and an academic, and managing contest prep and still coming in my best condition while trying to do all that. It's, I think, not nearly as stressful as then throwing a family on top of that. But compared to what I went through in, 07, 09, 2011, this prep has been more challenging, but the result has been that it's challenged me and made me better so that I can integrate the whole process into life. And I think the standard bodybuilder approach of basically simplifying your life in the course of prep, it almost makes it less likely that some of the benefits that you can get from the bodybuilding lifestyle extend into other parts of your life. Like, Brian, you were talking about the difficulties and challenges of prep making recovery from broken limbs easier. And I was immediately thought of, I had FAI surgery, I had bilateral hip surgery in February 2017. And I remember when I had a partial hamstring tear in 09 and how it was just like devastating to me. And it was really actually quite minor, didn't even need surgery. And compared to this time, it's supposed to be like a 6-month recovery. And I was like, well, that's no big deal. Here's what I can do. I do machines, I can do hip thrusts. And I didn't know, no one knew that I actually had surgery if they hadn't seen me on crutches in the first couple days. And largely because I could look at the contest preps like you had and put it in perspective.
Absolutely.
And I've had bodybuilders who just are like, I don't understand how you presented at a conference 1 week out in Melbourne and you're traveling then to the States the next week. And I'm like, yeah, and I mean, there's a version of me that just couldn't have conceived of doing that. And I think because I've, like you, have tried to maintain a life and been achievement oriented both in and outside of bodybuilding while bodybuilding, it's expanded my own capacity more holistically, which I think is the main benefit of bodybuilding if one takes it that way. So I think that's a really cool story. And I think one other thing I want to touch on is how you're able to both maintain, I think this is just really an interesting part of your psychology. You have this very high level goal of I want to be a world champion that you've been holding on to, learning from and driving towards, yet also this level of humility, which I think actually serves you. So I don't know if you remember this, but in 2000, it might have been 2009, we had met at the, I think it was Kurt Wiedner beat Sean Clarita. It was,
that was a California show. Yeah.
Right, yeah, it was a Leroy Perry show. I got beat by Scott Kluth, who got his pro card. I placed second. It was my last show of 2009. That was it was the Crest Theater. I'm blanking on the actual name of the show. I think it might have been the West Coast Classic. It's a Pro-Am. And Brian is there prepping Kurt Wiedner, or helping Kurt Wiedner, who's another fantastic natural bodybuilder. And he's super, super down to earth and humble, and I'm trying not to crap my pants. And he's just like, "Hey man, what's up?" I'm like, "Oh, hey Brian," because Brian, if you listen to his timeline, he competed in his first show just 2 years before I did. Mm-hmm. So to see him, he was someone I could relate to, very similar goals, and just a hardworking kind of blue collar bodybuilder who I always had my eyes on as someone who I should think about the way he does it. So then, anyway. A few, I want to say weeks or months after that show, you sent me a picture and asked me about my thoughts on your posing. About how do you think I could improve my side relaxed? And I just looked at it and I showed it to Berto, and I'm like, why is Brian Whitacre asking me about my posing advice? and Berto was like, that's Brian, man. If he can find a way to improve, he will, and he's not going to let his ego get in the way. And I was like, I've been coaching for like a year. I've been personal trainer most of this time. This is the lightweight world champion. And he was like, well, just give him your advice. He wants it. I was like, all right. I hemmed and hawed for like a day before I could respond. But it just struck me how impressive that quality is, that you are always in the hunt for a way to improve something, yet also maintaining that humility and drive. So I guess I just want to say I found that not only just impressive, but also very instructive. And keeping my ego in check, I think has been probably something very beneficial for me. And that was just such a poignant example of how breaking down the barriers of your own ego can help you improve.
That's a really cool story. Thanks for sharing that, Eric, and I appreciate you remembering that. But yeah, I completely agree with you a lot. One thing I do see a lot with even some of the young competitors here that are just starting to get into it is they only want to hear about their strong points. They only want to say, hey, look at this amazing side chest that I have, or look how great my biceps are. That is not going to cut it when it comes down to getting on stage. You're only as good as your weak point. So I'm always looking for little tweaks, with training techniques, supplementation, posing that can get you to the next level. And I'm always looking for criticism. That's one thing I'm not big on sharing photos on social media, because all anybody ever says is, "Oh, you look amazing." That's not the kind of feedback that I want. Instead of doing that, I tend to, like you said, share pictures with people I trust and know, or give me some good feedback. Instead of "you look amazing," try this tweak, try crunching down instead of blowing out, or just rotate more on your side chest or whatever. So that's the kind of feedback I'm looking for. You need more sweep in that shot, so work on that in your off season, whatever the case is. So I completely agree with you that humility is important. I think it's also kind of just part of the person that I am. I'm a pretty humble person. To this day, I don't own a sleeveless T-shirt. I don't like training in tank tops or anything like that. And probably very few people at my gym even know that I'm a competitive bodybuilder, except for the ones that I've talked to about it. So that's just part of me, and I think it's important to have that humility even when you get to the higher echelons of the sport. And I guess that's all I have there.
Go for it, Omar.
Yeah, so as a tangent, I want your opinion, Brian, because to give maybe some of the listeners some perspective. How impressive is it on the bodybuilding scale, the fact that Eric, after winning his show, did not have a celebratory meal? Just talking a little bit about that asceticism with bodybuilding, or some of the moderation that I've been hearing, or some of those choices, where I thought that was an interesting...
Hey, that salmon salad was good. It just wasn't a blowout.
It just wasn't a blowout.
I celebrated. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, so that was going to be my first question. And then I do want to dive into the balance between being genuinely critical, trying to improve oneself, and then balance that against any potential, masochism that sometimes, from my outside observation of as a whole, body or a lot of sports can
Or like
happen.
the lack of appreciation.
Yeah. So first, Brian, the celebratory meal, resisting the celebratory, because you said you broke both your legs.
Yes.
And that was easier to recover from than going through prep, to give people some perspective. And so it's pretty much a standard that you compete and then you have a celebratory meal. So deciding to say no at the end, the Wizard of Oz, at the end of the road, denying the yellow brick road, is that impressive? Am I? Yeah.
Let me say this: it would be more impressive if he didn't have a show the following week.
Oh,
Right, so
yeah. There you
so
go.
I think he still has his eyes on that end of the tunnel, to be honest, and I don't blame him one bit. That's exactly what I would do as well.
Yeah.
Although you've gone through all this, you've prepped, you can, you accomplished your goal of winning that show. Maybe he could have had, a piece of something, but if it was me, I would have done the exact same thing. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, and I'll tell you this: food never tastes as good as when you're completely done and then you have that first meal. That's amazing. So Eric, he's not quite completely done yet, so I can see why he held off. It's still impressive. Some people will still will go out and have a meal in between shows, but I would have done the same thing. So kudos, Eric.
2 weeks out still, bro. See?
Spoken like the Yoda to your Obi-Wan. Now, the question where you did say, and I find that really interesting, once again, to juxtapose maybe what people would assume, in that, from the outside, once again, you hear things like bodybuilders are self-absorbed or whatever. They're doing it for their ego, like all these various comments. But what you said, I found fascinating, Brian, where you said, not only are you open to critiques, you're actively trying to improve yourself, and you're trying to surround yourself basically not with yes men, not with individuals that will say, oh man, like you look fantastic, you're the man, like you have the, if all we use to assess bodybuilding is pumping iron, or some of the videos that we see from muscular development where you basically have your entourage, you know what I mean, like your posse that is always just blowing smoke.
Where's Tammy with my Tupperware?
yeah. And it's fascinating, because the more I discover about natural bodybuilding, the more it honestly, and there's examples, so it must be said, perhaps contrary to this, but how it stands kind of in opposition, or how it stands closer to maybe my original viewpoint on some of the physical culture aspects of improving oneself. Where I want to talk later about how bodybuilding has assisted perhaps in your academic career and your life in general. But can you just speak briefly about that fine balance between being critical of yourself in a genuine way, trying to improve yourself, and then maybe some of that potential masochism that, again, as an outsider, you could see in bodybuilding and in other sports. But how do you balance that between I'm trying to improve myself and kind of I'm not happy with myself?
Yeah, let's hear from Brian first, because I have a lot of thoughts.
That's a really good question. For me, it was never. I never had an issue with beating myself up too much. I graduated high school at 115 pounds. I was a string bean. So, and even then, I was happy with myself. I wouldn't say I wanted to change, but I wasn't beating myself up because I was a small kid. And I think it's important to actively seek out ways to improve without beating yourself up. So some people, that might be, if they are really, if they only hear negative stuff, that might be detrimental to them. To me, it's not. That's the kind of feedback I want. And I think, you can tell people that. Most people, when they post on social media, probably some people probably only want to hear the positive feedback, right? And in fact, I think you can get flamed if you say mean things or post a critique. So for some people, that might not be good. For me, that's the reason I would send pictures to people, is because I wanted to know what I could improve on, how I could be doing it better. And it was never about, that's, none of the people I would send pictures to would have to worry about, he's just gonna, he's gonna beat himself up too much if I really critique him. That's what I want to hear. I don't post pictures because I want to hear how great I look. I want to hear more about what I can change to be better. And so I think it really kind of delves down to individual personality. The people that I would send pictures to knew what kind of feedback I was looking for. They didn't feel like they had to fluff me up, or they weren't concerned about really beating me up, or me beating myself up mentally if they said something negative. So I think it's very much a personality thing. There are people who probably would get very upset if the only thing they heard were negative comments. But I think that will come across when you have that conversation with the people that you're trying to get feedback from. So I think that's a valid point, though, especially for new athletes.
Yeah, I think it's also a valid point for a lot of the personalities that are drawn to the sport of bodybuilding. Mm-hmm. You see perfectionism being very high, and you sometimes see, not always, but a conflation between self-worth and an overvaluation of their shape and physique when you start to look at the bodybuilding research. So I do think one thing I make sure that I do occasionally is I express my own pride, but not from like a pride as like a sin, but appreciation is probably the word I'm looking for what I've accomplished and where I've started. Absolutely. Without necessarily saying, and that means I'm the man, So I think it's important how you frame it and what you say, but appreciating and valuing and finding meaning and happiness in bodybuilding is something that I display intentionally. I think about, people need to see this. And the reason being is that I experience most bodybuilders as already incredibly hardworking, already trending towards overdoing it, if anything. Yeah, I think they do a lot of times have blinders, and they don't want to let go of their ego, sometimes for the same reasons they got into the sport. Mm-hmm. It's fragile. They're trying to replace it. So when they get negative feedback, they don't handle it well, at least initially. And that's something they can learn from bodybuilding, is getting better at integrating negative feedback in a positive way, like Brian talks about. But that's a slow process for many. And sometimes if it comes from that masochistic place you were talking about, Omar, it's they're great at getting better, but they find that they're not happy in bodybuilding. They immediately set the bar higher as soon as they achieve something. At first it was like, oh, I'm never going to win my class in the novice. They win their class in the novice. I've got to win a novice overall. I'm never going to win the novice overall. I won the novice overall. Can go into the open, and onward and onward. And you've got someone who's placing top 5 in the pros, and until they win a championship, they can't be happy. And I guarantee you that once they actually do achieve that final goal, they're still not going to be happy. Yeah. Because that if you can't stop and smell the roses along the way as you're trying to get towards a goal and hold those two things in balance, then there's something missing internally, and you're looking outside. And I think we've seen this in the States as just kind of our culture and North America as a whole. We have the archetype of the highly successful CEO with a family who then takes his own life. And what's going on here? Achievement can't be everything. There has to be meaning as well. So I think it is really important from my perspective to, yes, take everything that Brian has talked about, because that is what makes you a champion. But make sure that you're actually enjoying the sport, that you are loving it, because there is a point where you don't get to be the champion because you look up in 5 years later and you're like, why the hell am I doing this? And I've seen that happen, unfortunately, way too many times with bodybuilders, or they stay in because they feel obligated to some part of themselves. So I do think it is personality specific. 'Cause I think what it sounds like is Brian had self-worth and a certain amount of awareness of where he started at 115 pounds in high school to, I'm 160 on stage. That's awesome. I'm leaner and 50 pounds heavier. Like, that's great. But I'm trying to be world champion here. Like, quit patting my back, okay? But not all bodybuilders can make that distinction. So I think that's something to be self-aware of for the listeners. If you have trouble making that distinction, if you have forgotten where you started and how far you've come, take a second. Look at your pictures before you ever started lifting. You know, I know that's something I've had to do in actually powerlifting. Probably just because I'm not that I'm a gifted powerlifter or bodybuilder, in my opinion, in terms of like just gifted or anything like that. But I'm objectively a much worse powerlifter than I am a bodybuilder.
You're statuesque, coach.
Thank you. Yeah, you look great. Yeah. So, and I know that when I was looking at the numbers, as an example goal. So I always wanted to compete in the Arnold as a powerlifter, and they had a Wilks score qualifier that you could enter. And I was like, that's a reasonable goal based on where I'm at. Back in the mid 2000s, it's 375 Wilks. Which back then was impressive. Mm-hmm. And I'm in the 360s. And then as soon as I got close to 375, they bumped up to 400. And I was like, oh, wow, that's a really good Wilks. Then when I got to around 395 Wilks, they bumped it to 435. And I was just like, okay, I'm improving, but the field is improving faster than I am. And it just made me realize that perhaps, and I was losing the appreciation for the fact that, when I first started powerlifting, I was not totaling 1,000 pounds. And at 1,200 pounds, I was more frustrated with my total than when I was when it was 950, And And I'm like, that's not right.
Yeah.
So I think that might just speak to my analytical nature with numbers, but that was an example for me where I really needed to wake up and smell the roses and appreciate, like, look, these joints probably aren't going to bench 500 pounds, but they're damn sure benching more than when they started.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the voice you say to yourself. I'm stronger than when I started. Like the positive self-talk voice is a little frail. Yeah.
That muscle hasn't been exercised very much compared to my pecs. Yeah.
That's a good question, though, Eric, for you, Brian. How do you continue to find enjoyment or appreciation or perspective in a sport or an endeavor where you're continuously trying to improve yourself, but you're trying to balance that with what you've achieved? Or kind of like what you said, I actually could relate what Eric said in that, the first time, whatever, you bench 315, it's a huge, landmark. And then you bench press, whatever, 345, 350. And then relative to what you see where your competition is, you're like, oh, man, I need to catch up. It's like you're getting stronger, but you're getting less satisfied with your outcome. So maybe you've been now competing in bodybuilding. Would it be 14 years?
Yeah, well, let's see. Yeah, around there. I mean, 15 or so.
Yeah. So how do you then continue to find enjoyment or appreciation or perspective in the sport?
So here's the thing. Again, I was, so focused for a long time on winning that world title. And I think it's a good point, Eric. I was proud of myself when I won those lightweight titles, and I said, hey, I've come a long way, and I'm accomplishing what I want to. I just haven't met that ultimate goal yet. And so I was pushing towards that, but I still took a step back and realized that, hey, I've come a long way on this journey. And so I'll be honest, when I won everything in 2015, I don't know that I'd had that same fire in me anymore. And that's one reason why I haven't competed since then. That fire is crucial. You've got to have that. You've got to have something driving you. And on those days when you're on low calories and you don't feel good and you've got to get the job done anyway, that internal fire is the thing that's going to push you to get there. And I think that's true in all aspects of life and, your job and, just being passionate about your family life and things like that. But for me, I'm still training. I still, and trying to push myself as hard as I can, but I haven't yet gotten to the point where I'm like, what? I think that fire's still down there somewhere. I think I can call on it. And maybe that'll happen in the next couple of years. We'll have to see. But I think that having that internal drive to want to accomplish a high level goal and realizing that it's going to take a lot to get there and that you think you have something to draw on, I think that's crucial. And so, for me, it wasn't there anymore. I accomplished what I wanted to do, and I kind of took a step back and said, hey, you know what? Now maybe I can, let me go ahead and spend a little bit more time with my family and not even worry. I haven't counted a macro in a long time, although I still eat, pretty reasonable. So I think that internal drive and fire is crucial, but, I'm still doing kind of what I want to do, but I haven't taken that next step yet to say, okay, it's, I'm ready to commit to this process, which is a long and arduous one, as you know. So,
indeed. Yeah. And I think you can see different perspectives on this depending on how quickly the athlete has success. This is something that I've experienced coaching people. I've had the fortune of coaching people who've won pro shows, placed top 3 at Worlds, and then also IPF World Champions, and then people who, they're looking to get that 1,000-pound total for the first time, and they're in the 220s. And it's a very different journey for all of them, primarily based on the individuality, but also based on what happens and then where they focus. And one of the roles of a coach, I feel, is to help them work on the weak points of their own motivation and perspective. Because when you get early success in sport, it's very easy for the external aspect and benefits to become the primary focus, because that's an immediate reward. It feels good. It is actually the goal objectively of the sport from a very sportsman's perspective. But a lot of the aspects of what I would call amateur sport, and I don't mean amateur in the sense of not being a professional, but I mean in the true original sense of amateur, which has to do with doing the sport for the love of the sport, and then having sport trickle down back into life, kind of coming back to physical culture. That aspect of being an amateur sports person is something that you need to emphasize almost more with your high-level athletes, because that extrinsic reward is easier for them to attain, or it comes earlier. And they will sometimes have atrophied senses of enjoyment of the process, or an atrophied sense of appreciating their own self-improvement when they're focused on the lane next to them and the people they're competing against. So it's an interesting thing where someone, and I think Brian's a good example of someone, he's still training. He's still open to the idea of competing. He's focusing on other aspects of his life. So he's got, a lot of self-worth from other places besides how big his pecs are and whether or not he got the first place trophy. But I have seen people who stop lifting, who are just eat whatever, and who you wouldn't know they used to be a world champion or whatever in the past, or whatever level they achieved, because they had no ability to prevent that atrophy, if you will. So I think for me as a competitive bodybuilder who has not been nearly as successful as Brian, but who had set literally the same goals. I remember that when I first started, I even said this to my wife in the car, again, something I wouldn't say publicly except in retrospect to show how messed up it kind of is. At the time, I think, so my two inspirational figures in bodybuilding for me are yourself and also Philip Ricardo Jr., someone I've always been really, really impressed with, who has given up his spot competing in, like, say, the Natural Olympia because he decided to take a deployment for another Marine who was having a kid and say, no, I got that. So just the kind of human he is, it inspires me. And while he also brings an insane level of conditioning, I'd say probably the only other person I think who gets as conditioned as Brian Whitacre is Philip Ricardo Jr. There's a handful of others, don't get me wrong, but he's also, he's won pretty much every title, I think, except for WNBF Worlds. Yeah. So he's done similar things. He's won like the Natural Olympia and the New York Cup in the same year. So Philip Ricardo Jr., shout out to you.
He's not listening, Coach. I'm just trying. You're like in my heart.
I at least know Brian Whitaker's listening to this episode. Okay,
Coach, this is the longest roundabout for you to say, because you haven't achieved what you wanted, you're going to be doing this shit long term. You're in it to win it. You're stepping on stage at 80 years old.
That is true. But the roundabout I'm getting to, and thank you for getting me to actually say my point, is I've had to find different reasons for why I compete. My meaning has changed over time and it's evolved. I think if, like for Brian, like, at a relatively early stage in your career, you were knocking on the door of being a world champ. You had won the lightweight title pretty quickly. And I think that gives you, there's only one goal after that. It's the overall, right? And I think, that's an external goal that can drive you. And I think, being who you are, you had a lot of other factors of your life that gave you a much more robust protection against this. But for me, like, just getting a pro card was a big deal. And it took me till 2011. And then in the federation that is probably not as objectively as competitive as the INBF. And now I'm trying to get my pro card in the WNBF. And then from there, we'll see. So I've got this long road of these external goals that are quite far away. Yeah. So in the interim, things like how does this affect my life, the way I view the world, the artistic component of bodybuilding, the creative aspect, bringing back my breakdancing from when I was a younger man, and all those elements, I've developed this very, I would like to say, rich appreciation for bodybuilding that is not one-dimensional, that I don't think it's unique or better, but it's helped me stay in the sport and appreciate it. And I know that's going to look 100% different for every single person, but I do think at all levels, whether you're a world champion or whether you're going to place last in every single show you do, if you enjoy the process of bodybuilding, you have to find appreciation for it outside of simply what rewards do you get externally. And I think, Brian, you're a great example of that. Even though you've achieved the highest level, you're still training, you're still tracking your food, not necessarily your macros, but like you're living the lifestyle. And I don't think there's going to be a reality where you're like, I don't lift anymore. Yeah,
that'll never happen. This will always be a part of my life. I mean, that's honestly one reason I had the surgery, so that I could keep training in the way that I want to. So you're right. I can see how some people, if they're only doing it for the rewards, for those those trophies, once that stops, I can see how they would fall off the wagon completely. But like you're saying, if you're doing it for the right reasons to enhance other aspects of your life as well, I'll never stop. I'll never stop. Watching what I eat and training hard and just kind of living that lifestyle. I think that's what a true natural bodybuilder will do.
My man. Can we reframe this then, Coach, and talk about, Brian, the fact that in your hierarchy of not who you are or what you do, bodybuilding was third, as we said. Can you speak about how bodybuilding has affected other aspects of your life, both positively, negatively? It seems it's overwhelmingly been a huge positive, but how it's lent itself to those other aspects, your career, your family, who you are as a person.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's been overwhelmingly positive. And I think the main way that it's been positive is just that it's shown me that I do have the power to really focus in on something and push towards it, and whether it's a long-term goal or a short-term goal. Maybe it's either, like you said, bench a certain amount. I've never benched 365 though, but whether it's a short-term goal or a long-term goal, like, it took me a decade to win the title that I wanted. I've tried to take that same approach in my professional life. There's short-term goals that I've worked towards and long-term goals. And it showed me that, that I do have the mental focus to get something like this done. And I mean, we kind of compared it to the surgery. Everything else it's not that hard. When you going through a prep, I think is one of the hardest things you could ever do. And so I just kind of keep reminding myself when I'm struggling with something at work, at least I'm not on 1,600 calories right now. But so I do think it's been overwhelmingly positive, just because it's taught me that I have the mental ability to push through to something and see something to finish. And I think that's very vital in most professional outlets, and as well as in your personal life. And I think it's good for my kids too. My kids are a little too young to remember when I competed, but we still talk about bodybuilding and how it's good to have goals and try to train and do things you enjoy and try to push yourself in those. So I think it's good from a family perspective. I don't think it's been really detrimental at all. I think one thing it's really taught me is the importance of planning. I mean, Eric, you probably can attest to this from your last week, but if you're traveling, as you're contest prepping, you have to plan ahead. Okay, I got to figure out how I'm going to get all my meals packed. If I can't pack all my meals, I have to plan out ahead where I'm going to eat while I'm traveling. I have to find the local gym, plan everything. There you go. All right, there you go. I'll tell you what, I had many conferences where the only thing I packed was protein powder, oatmeal, and almonds, and you can control exactly how much you take in of each. And I had days where that was the only thing I ate. 4 days of protein powder, oatmeal, and enough almonds to get my fat content. So you can control your macros. You just have to push yourself to get the job done. So it helped me with planning. It helped me with setting routines, which I think is pretty important for most bodybuilders. And again, it taught me the importance of prioritization. So I prioritize things in work. I prioritize things in family life, and bodybuilding has helped me out with all those things.
Yeah, I very much relate to that, and I think it's one thing to hear from the River City Classic,
River City Royal Rumble Classic champion,
the champion, to say like, hey, you can be a successful bodybuilder and be balanced. So I really just appreciate, because there's how our community is. It's very much kind of handed down from the seniority and like the hierarchies in bodybuilding,
mm-hmm.
which makes sense, because as one of like two people who researches bodybuilding, shout out to my other guy. There's a handful of us. Don't get me wrong, but it's not exactly something where you can go to PubMed and be like, hey, I'd like to read the latest S&C paper on football conditioning and all this. Most of our knowledge is handed down, and the way you do it just comes from the other bodybuilders who've gone before you. And there's very much this whole idea that you emulate the successful to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
So, on the hierarchy of success of someone who has a holistic approach to bodybuilding, I'm like, right here. But Brian is like no Mickey Mouse voice right here.
Yeah. His internal voice is vastly different.
Exactly.
You're like, you can do it. He's like, you got this shit.
You can do this, Brian.
Yeah. Something I do want to say, however, to give respect to you, Eric, and that is, I have to bring up, because I'm a cinephile, film, and that is, or we could bring up hip-hop culture, an emerging culture in recent times. So natural bodybuilding, I'd say the same thing. Is it safe to say it's been emerging over the last 30 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think the very first natural bodybuilding show that I'm aware of was 1978.
I thought you were going to say 1898, but not like that because they were when they competed.
I should
But
say the reemergence,
Recent, yeah, reemergence,
the reemergence of natural bodybuilding after the explosion and almost ubiquitous use of anabolic steroids in natural bodybuilding. There was a paper where they were looking at it in 1978. Chet Yorton essentially is kind of the father of, hence the Yorton Cup, the father of natural bodybuilding. He became aware in the late 60s that a lot of guys were starting to use anabolics. Didn't really, he wasn't down with that, and started the first drug-free bodybuilding competitions in the 70s. So that's actually right around the same time that hip hop emerged out of the Bronx from them, Puerto Rican and African American kids, and also some actually white kids from the punk rock music getting together and dancing to break beats in New York. The Bronx. So yeah, it's a similar timeline.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to say emerging aspects of culture. So film before, especially during the silent era, Akira Kurosawa in his something like an autobiography talks about this, that it wasn't viewed as an artistic medium, film, when it first emerged. And in fact, it was the pioneers, the directors, some of the critics that then lent it weight. They were able to analyze what was going on and then delve deeper into the meaning of what film is. And then it became part of the culture where, of course, film is something with intense artistic merit. Same idea when it comes to hip-hop culture, where at first, like, what, these are guys just speaking over samples or beats, like, what's going on here? And then over time, because it's an emerging property of culture, those that love it a lot are able to really analyze it and break down why it's so important, what it truly means. And so I know you're joking about yourself and the handful of researchers, but it's been really cool me joining you here, hearing you talk in general on iron culture or how you conduct yourself for natural bodybuilding. That, well, my man, you might be only, as you say in quotations, the River City Royal Rumble Classic champion, as an ambassador and as a conduit for the sport in order to explain it either to the masses or do further research in order to dispel certain myths. I think it's invaluable. So,
a lot of it is I think it's a reflection of, like I was saying, how as you progress in the sport for a longer period, you have to find new meaning to stay motivated and keep that fire. Like Brian was saying, is that I'm finding fire in places I didn't expect, which almost sounds like an STD
wildfire.
Or something.
Oh, yeah.
That's not good.
Might sound like crabs.
Yeah, like, I found fire in a place I didn't expect, Doc. Don't do that. But yeah, no. Thank you, honestly, and I think you're 100% right. Is that art is not defined by I'm going to go out and do art. Art and expression and creativity is an inherent aspect of being a human.
Yes.
And then it comes, similar aspects of it come out of cultures. So I think it's just a really cool thing to see some of the artistic elements get highlighted in bodybuilding, which is a part that I appreciate. I know not every bodybuilder really cares about that aspect.
Yep.
Doesn't need to be the main component.
Sure.
But it is a component. It's there on the table if someone wants to do that, and that's something that I relate to, that gives me meaning, that keeps me fired up in strange places.
Let me ask you, Brian, are there any aspects from competing, and I thought it was interesting where you said on social media you try and keep either photos of yourself limited, or you don't like to post it, or even in the gym where you don't own a tank top, which stands in stark contrast once again to most bodybuilders.
Brian is a little less flamboyant than I will say.
Yeah. How's your breakdancing, Brian?
Not so good. Not so good.
Okay. Yeah. So we've now learned that bodybuilding isn't a monolith.
No.
Okay.
Bodybuilding is not a monolith.
Yeah. Now, here's a question. So, considering that our audience it comes from a diverse array, and that is one of the aspects that we attempt here at Iron Culture is to reverse the fracturing of the community. So there might be individuals listening that, like myself, up until recently, weren't really aware of natural bodybuilding as an ambassador, as a champion. Is there anything about the sport that you would like to speak about that we have not covered that you think needs to be expounded upon?
Well, so I mean, I think I haven't listened to all your all's podcasts, but I really like the one, Eric, that you guys did. I know you had some of the other 3DMJ guys on there talking about kind of some of your horror stories.
Yeah.
And I have one example I'll share about that in a second. But, generally, I'd like to share that it's a pretty supportive community.
Yes.
And I mean, like I was, Eric was saying, I sent him pictures. Even the people that I would compete directly against, when I would see him at shows, I'd be like, man, you look great. You look amazing. You've done some really good work this year. And we just kind of trade war stories about training and how difficult prep has been and stuff like that. But the natural community gets it. They get how hard it is to mesh this with other aspects of your life. And like you said, we're not in it for the money. We're in it because we love it. And that's why, the natty scene is probably, I don't know much about the NPC non-natty scene, but I've heard it's significantly different over there. They're not as friendly. They're not as supportive of each other. So, I mean, I love going to shows and talking to either new people or people that have been there for a long time. It really is like a brotherhood when you see guys that you've been at this with for, a decade plus, and you're like, man, you look great. You've made some good improvements. Their families and stuff like that. So it really is, a whole community. And, the whole internet thing is great because when I was coming on, we first started having forums, and you could actually get in touch with other people who were involved in this. And then you can kind of go to shows and meet them and just develop, relationships over time. But, once you're in the natty scene, you're really in it for life, man. It's pretty cool. In fact, funny story is that I was
like a gang.
I was just at the Arnold Classic. I think it might have been this year or last year. And I saw Kai Green at the airport when I was leaving, and I actually went up to him and I was like, "Hey, man," I was like, "We remember you from your WNBF days." And he was like, "Oh yeah, man." I was like, "I won it a couple of years ago," and he was like, "Oh, congratulations, that's really awesome." He was, he's still a WNBF guy at heart to some extent. So I would just stress that it's not just about your time on stage and getting a trophy. It's about developing camaraderie, pushing yourself, watching other people push themselves, and helping other people get. And you as a coach, Eric, do this in particular. Pushing people to be the best version of themselves that they can. So I really think it's. I mean, we kind of talked about this throughout, but it's not just bodybuilding. It's how it transfers to other aspects of your life that I think is the big benefit of competing.
Man, that would be the best picture in the world, to have someone have captured Brian Whitacre shaking hands with Kai Green, both of them smiling, because that's something. Obviously, I've done one NPC show, and just being kind of an active entrepreneur in the bodybuilding scene, I've experienced a lot of both the enhanced and the natural community, and I would agree there are some differences, but at the same time, I try to remind myself, like, I'm pretty crazy and insane when you really think about it, and we are putting on oil-based sheen after dieting ourselves to emaciated levels while lifting weights and then flexing on stage. Like, it's pretty ridiculous either way. And if the only difference between me and you is that you're taking a little more than creatine, sometimes a lot more than creatine. I mean, there it's a difference, but there's you could make the argument. I don't know if I agree with it, that the similarities between me and an enhanced bodybuilder are closer than me and just the average person in the world. So
Eric, can I make the nerdiest analogy for my outside observations? And I'm going to catch some flack. Natural bodybuilders are like Vulcans.
Okay.
And bodybuilders are like Romulans.
Oh, wow. That is the nerdiest.
I'm a loser.
No, I am.
But I could expound upon that. I won't, but I think there's some implications potentially.
I love it. We actually come from the same homeworld, and it's not true genetic differences. It's not that Vulcans don't have logic. It's they train themselves out of. They made a conscious decision to not use anabolics, and then some of them they stray. The emotion takes them, and they are essentially just uncontrolled Romulans. Yeah. And Romulans are not just inherently evil. That's kind of like that perspective in the early stages of Star Trek, and you get to see a little more like, hey, it would be great if Romulus and Remus can come back together. Yeah. So I don't even want to shift that question over to Brian, because I respect him too much to make him say something that nerdy. Yeah. You can definitely chime in on our Star Trek enhanced natural bodybuilding parallel if you'd like. If you want to maintain your integrity, you can definitely not.
And let's just say I'm a little less well versed on the distinct differences between Romulans and Vulcans than you guys appear to be.
See, still the coolest guy on the podcast.
No, yeah,
easily done. But yeah, I totally agree, and I think it's awesome that that you did that. You shook his hand, and I think it's a great example of even though, like you said, bodybuilding is not a monolith. Not even natural bodybuilding is a monolith. Like, you know, I'm in the gym with my shirt off, flexing and putting it on YouTube, and Brian doesn't own a cutoff shirt. Right. But we still respect each other, and I think we're still trying to get across the same message, that we do this for a higher purpose. It's not just about self-gratification, and our personality differences and the messages we're trying to get across might be different aspects of the same whole, done slightly differently. But yeah, because like you said, there's an expressive, creative component of bodybuilding, it's going to look a little different for everybody. But what unifies us, like Brian said, is the knowledge that we're striving against the iron in a state where our body wants to do nothing except order pizza, you know? And I think that is that ascetic component, that asceticism of having to be regimented, have an individual pursuit, and decide to sacrifice things that make your life more enjoyable for something that in the long run will make your life better and more meaningful, is what would bind together someone who is 5'9", 280 shredded, or 5'9", 160 shredded. So yeah, I think that's a really cool aspect of it, and it's something I really appreciate you highlighting, Brian, because I think that's really important.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah, I think now, to close out, considering the fact that you listed being an economics professor quite high up there in terms of who you are, you know, I did a little book learning, not a whole lot. We could talk Adam Smith, we could talk Keynesian, we could talk Milton, right? We could talk a few things, but I just want your opinion, because another
brief tangent. Omar's the impressive guy here. He can talk Star Trek with me, or he can talk economics with you, even though neither one of us speaks that second language. So you guys go for it. Go.
I'm someone that speaks about 20 languages very poorly. Now, with that being said, I just want to know whether or not you agree with the statement that another bodybuilder said, who is interested, does not have an economics degree, does not have a PhD, is not a professor of economics, but is very interested in economics.
You're throwing shade right now.
Yeah. What's that?
You're throwing shade right now.
No. Would you agree that the sole function of an individual in the capitalist society is to maximize personal wealth?
It depends on your perspective. I think, you know, a traditional Keynesian economist would probably say yes, but there's certainly different theories out there. You know, that's a capitalistic society. That's your goal, right? If you're focused on optimizing your personal utility, it's probably in terms of income. So there's definitely other, you know, theories and perspectives out there, but I think there's some people that would definitely argue that. Yeah.
And the real question is, should society be?
Yeah, should. That's a different question.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now that would go off into the weeds, so I thought I would just ask that question, and that's it, Coach.
I think you did really well. And shout out to the bodybuilder who knows who we're talking about him right now.
Who also is not listening. You're like,
probably not. Yeah.
Eric's like, everybody listens to this podcast.
I need to believe this. I need to protect my ego and not get feedback from other people. That's what I learned from Brian
Whitacre. Yes.
Yep. So, Brian, at this stage, I just want to say a huge thank you for coming on. This has been a tremendous honor. You're someone I look up to, and I think you set a great example of someone who has their self-esteem, self-worth, and perspective in a lot of different buckets, yet has achieved literally everything you set out to accomplish, to the point where now you're like, well, I got to see what kind of fire's left, which I think it's cool. And huge respect. Is there anything we've not covered that you want to say on anything or outside of what we talked about?
Well, I do want to tell you my one story, my horror story that I mentioned. That you guys were sharing your little nightmare story. So first of all, I'm proud of the fact that through 15 years of competing, I really don't have any of these. I'm sure the one experience that I had, and I think this was so my wife is very supportive of my whole bodybuilding career. She doesn't compete, she doesn't diet, but she knows what it takes to get there, and is realizes how hard I pushed to get there. So I think this is like 2012 or 2013, and when I go into prep, I eat my food and she eats her food. And makes food for the family, and I kind of eat my own thing. And so it was one certain meal, and it must have been, a low calorie day where my dinner wasn't very filling, and I, probably wasn't in the best mood. And I don't remember what she had, but immediately after dinner, she said, "Oh man, I'm just so full." And I was not full. And I said, "Okay." I didn't say anything. And 20 minutes later, "Oh, that was so good. I'm just so full." And okay, bit my lip, didn't say anything. Good. I'm glad your meal was good. The third time, my stomach is just so full. I said, "Okay." This is the only time I've ever snapped. I said, "Okay, I understand you're full. I don't really want to hear about it anymore." The third time that she said it. And that was my one instance of snapping. And she looked at me like, "What?" She didn't even realize that, I don't get full when, I'm typically hungry. She thought I just kind of ate different foods and then just kind of got you lean that way. She didn't realize that it was very difficult not to, you kind of typically do get hungry during most of your prep. So that was the one time that I said, "Hey, please, I don't want to hear about how full you are anymore." That's my example of a kind of pushing it, of having the diet transfer over into other aspects of my life. So that was my one little story about that. And I appreciate you all sharing your
Whitacre,
there were some good ones.
You son of a bitch. You're an evil human. That's what I got from that.
My perspective has completely changed. Yeah.
I think that's incredible. For one, I have my goal has been to, the only reason I'm prepping is because I start to look emaciated and you wonder if I'm ill, which happens to all of us. It's a great sport.
Yeah.
Eventually, I can't hide it physically. You look much smaller in certain areas and not others. I'm confused. Are you okay, Eric? Yeah, okay, I'm prepping. Got it. And so, but you have been so successful that even your wife doesn't know that you're hungry during prep. That's pretty impressive. and then for that to be the quote unquote snap on the third strike, you struck out. And you probably look back at that as, I can always improve how I do this.
Yeah.
That is, you're not only a world champion, you're also a husband champion in my book right now. So well done. Big shout out to Brian Whitacre's family for putting up with this monster at home during prep. Yeah, exactly. Awesome, Brian. Huge thanks. Is there anywhere that you would want people to know about what you do, or people you're affiliated with, or if they can get more information on you or anything that you believe in?
Sure. I've got the website. It's just brianwhitacre.net. I haven't updated in a while, but I'll make sure I put a link to this up and some other things potentially. I am a Core Nutritionals sponsored athlete, so shout out to Doug Miller, who in my book is arguably the greatest natural bodybuilder of all time. They're doing some awesome things with Core. They've got some new products out. And so check them out if you're interested. I do have a Facebook presence also. So this is funny. I have a Facebook presence, but I have I think I have closing in on 1,500 friend requests that I haven't answered yet, just because I don't get on there very much. And then on Instagram, I have zero. I've never posted anything, and somehow I have over 1,000 followers. So I'm not sure how people are. I guess some people are just linking me. I rarely get on there, but you can try on Facebook. I'll try to get better of getting on there and accepting friend requests, but I'm rarely on there. I'm just not a social media person. But email is the best way to reach me. I'm happy to respond either to my professional email address or the one on my website. So I'm always happy to help out upcoming competitors, and I love the natural bodybuilding community. And thanks to you all for doing this kind of work and getting the word out there. Appreciate all your hard work, and congrats to both of you for making it successful, and to you, Eric, for a successful showing last week and a potentially better showing this next week.
Thank you very much, Brian. We really appreciate it.
I love it. I'm going to link everything in the description on the YouTube channel. Brian Whitacre, thank you for being on. I just want to thank everyone for listening. This is Iron Culture, the podcast where we take a historical, cultural, and scientific look at this lifting community that we love. We're all united under iron, and we always will be, now and forever after. And I just want to say that if you enjoyed this episode, you can help us, and it does help us, by leaving a rating and review on iTunes or a like on YouTube, perhaps subscribing there as well. You can leave a dislike if you also did not like any of the episodes. It's fine. We try, I should say, to take critiques.
All criticism, yes.
Yeah. We secretly rage. We secretly rage, Brian. But we cry.
We don't even rage. We just.
We're fine.
Yeah.
Our inside voice. We're fine. But we'll see everyone in that next episode every single Monday. Thank you for listening.